For as long as I could remember, my parents had promised me that they would cover my college tuition. It wasn't just a passing remark, it was a firm assurance, repeated time and time again throughout my childhood. I was never worried about the future because they always told me that money would never be an issue. My father ran a successful business, and my mother worked as a real estate agent. They were well off, living a comfortable life, and I believed, without a doubt, that they would keep their word. I never imagined, for one second, that I'd have to worry about funding my education. It was never part of the plan. I had my entire future mapped out, trusting them completely. But everything changed on my 18th birthday. That morning, my parents called me down for a family meeting, their faces grim, their eyes avoiding mine. My father broke the news like a punch to the gut. His business had suffered, and they could no longer afford to send me to college. Worse still, they had spent my college fund on a vacation home in Sabio just months before the financial strain hit. They prioritized a luxury property over my future, leaving me with nothing. It felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath me, and my entire world crumbled in an instant. The betrayal I felt that day was something I could never shake off. For years, my parents had reassured me, like clockwork, that my college tuition was guaranteed. I had always trusted them completely, never once questioning their promises. But when the news came crashing down on my 18th birthday, it shattered me in ways I never expected. My father, who had been distant for months, explained that their business had faced severe losses, and now they couldn't honor the promise they had made. The gut-wrenching part was when I found out that instead of preparing for my future, they had spent my college fund on a vacation home. I was devastated not just by the financial burden they placed on me, but by the deep emotional blow of realizing how easily they had chosen material things over my dreams. The hurt cut deeper when I saw their lack of empathy, their inability to understand why I felt abandoned. I had always been a good son, never asking for much, yet when it mattered the most, they failed me. In that moment, I felt so utterly alone, as if all the love and care they had shown me growing up were nothing more than empty words. My trust was broken, and with it, my belief in the family that I once thought would always be there for me. The betrayal from my parents was so overwhelming that I couldn't stay in that house another minute. That very evening, after the devastating news about my tuition, I packed my things and snuck out. I felt like I had no other choice. The anger, the confusion, and the pain were too much to bear, and I thought that maybe leaving would somehow make it all stop. I didn't think through the consequences, but at that moment, I was consumed by the desire to escape the toxic reality I had been thrust into. As I walked away from my childhood home, it was the only thing that made sense in my head. I ran to Haley, my childhood sweetheart, who had always been there for me. She had tried calling me all day, and when I showed up at her doorstep, her worried face quickly turned into one of relief. She knew something had to be wrong, and when I told her what happened, she listened without judgment. She understood the gravity of the situation because she had known my family for years and was just as shocked by their actions. Despite the chaos in my mind, Haley's house became my refuge. Her parents, kind and understanding, welcomed me without hesitation, though they knew my running away wasn't the best solution. They tried to reason with me, but I was too angry to listen. However, their support allowed me the space I needed to clear my head. I didn't know how long I would stay with them, but one thing was clear. In the midst of all the betrayal from my parents, Haley was the one person who made me feel understood, who gave me the love and comfort I so desperately needed. It was in her warmth that I found the strength to move forward. Haley's father, Mr. Turner, was a man of great integrity and compassion. When I confided in him about my situation, the pain of being abandoned by my parents weighed heavily on me. He knew the promise my parents had made about my tuition, and it angered him to see them break their words so recklessly. Without hesitation, he offered to help me pay for college. The gesture was more than just financial support. It was a lifeline in the midst of my turmoil. He told me, "You deserve a chance to build your future, no matter what happened before." I was hesitant at first, unsure of accepting help from someone who wasn't even my own parent. But Haley reassured me that this was the right thing to do. With Mr. Turner's support, I was able to continue my education without the constant fear of dropping out due to financial strain. But it wasn't just the tuition money that made a difference. It was the emotional support he gave me during that time. When I refused to communicate with my family, too hurt by their betrayal, Mr. Turner didn't pressure me to reconcile. Instead, he provided a steady and safe environment for me to heal. His understanding and kindness gave me the time and space I needed to reflect on my next steps. Despite the darkness I was facing, Mr. Turner's generosity became a turning point. His actions reminded me that not all families are bound by blood sometimes. The people who truly care for you show up when you need them most. With their support, I was able to focus on my studies and begin rebuilding my future. The distance between me and my family grew wider with each passing day. The betrayal of their broken promise regarding my tuition felt like a wound that refused to heal. I could no longer ignore the bitter truth that they had chosen to abandon me when I needed them the most. The weight of their silence was unbearable. Not only had they failed to support me financially, but emotionally, they had also left me to navigate this storm alone. The days without any communication from them stretched endlessly, and the isolation I felt was suffocating. I had always believed that family would be my unwavering support system, especially when I faced challenges. However, their lack of involvement shattered that belief. At the same time, the love and kindness Haley and her father showed me only amplified the contrast. While my own parents turned their backs, Mr. Turner stepped in to help me with my tuition and offered the emotional backing I desperately needed. Still, no matter how much they tried to ease my pain, I couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of loss. The emotional distance between me and my family became insurmountable. Every attempt to reach out was met with silence, which only deepened my sense of abandonment. I began to question everything: their promises, the life I had known, and even my own worth. The separation was not just physical. It was emotional, and it left a gaping hole in my heart that no amount of support from Haley's family could fully fill. It was as if the ties that once bound us were permanently severed, and no matter how much I longed for reconciliation, the distance between us seemed impossible to bridge. After months of emotional turmoil and distance from my family, a decision began to form deep within me. The pain of abandonment, the shattered promises, and the silence that had stretched for so long began to weigh on my heart. But despite all the anger and disappointment, I realized I couldn't keep running forever. The part of me that still clung to the hope of reconciliation, the part that once believed in family bonds, couldn't ignore the fact that I still longed for some sort of closure or understanding. Haley and her father, Mr. Turner, had done so much to help me through this difficult time. They paid for my tuition and gave me the emotional strength I didn't know I needed. Yet no matter how much I appreciated their support, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. That something was the possibility of healing the rift with my own family. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but deep down, I felt that I needed to face them. One evening, as I sat in silence, I made up my mind. I would go back. I would return to my family, not out of desperation, but because I wanted to understand why they had failed me and, more importantly, to see if there was any chance of rebuilding what we had once had. It wasn't about forgiveness at that moment, but about reclaiming a piece of the past I'd almost let go of. As I prepared to take the first steps toward confronting them, I didn't know what the outcome would be, but I knew I had to try. The day I decided to meet my family again was filled with both hope and trepidation. As I stood outside the house I once called home, memories of laughter, arguments, and countless shared moments flooded my mind. The weight of our fractured bond and the unanswered questions lingered in the air as I hesitated, my hand trembling above the doorbell. Haley had insisted I take this step, reminding me that even the most shattered relationships could be mended with courage and honesty. When the door creaked open, my mother's face appeared, etched with shock and emotion. Her eyes brimmed with tears as she called my name, the sound filled with a mixture of relief and remorse. My father stood behind her, his once stern expression softened by time and guilt. In that moment, I saw not just the people who had let me down, but also the family who had struggled with their own fears and failures. As I stepped inside, the atmosphere was thick with emotion. Words tumbled out awkwardly at first, questions about my life, apologies for their actions, and their struggle to balance their pride and their mistakes. My father admitted he had been overwhelmed by his inability to provide for me, a truth he had hidden behind his anger. My mother confessed her pain in watching me leave and her regret for not standing up for me. It wasn't an immediate reconciliation, but as the hours passed, the walls between us began to crumble. For the first time in years, we spoke honestly, acknowledging our flaws and expressing the love we had buried under misunderstandings. By the end of the evening, I felt a spark of hope reignite, proof that even the deepest wounds could begin to heal with time and effort. Rebuilding my relationship with my family was not an overnight transformation, but a gradual journey toward understanding and forgiveness. After the emotional reunion, we committed to moving forward, not by erasing the past, but by learning from it. My father, once a symbol of disappointment and unresolved tension, took steps to mend our bond. He acknowledged the pressure he had placed on me and expressed genuine regret for letting his pride interfere with our relationship. His words were more than just an apology, they were the foundation of a new chapter. Haley and her father continued to play a pivotal role in my life. Haley encouraged me to stay connected with my family, reminding me that healing takes time and effort. Her father, who had become a surrogate figure during my estrangement, offered advice on navigating these uncharted waters of reconciliation. Their support reminded me of the importance of having a network of people who genuinely cared for my well-being. As the months turned into years, my family and I found ways to bridge the gap that had once separated us. Weekly calls with my mother became a ritual, and visits home were no longer shrouded in tension. We embraced small steps toward rebuilding trust, celebrating birthdays together, reminiscing over old family photos, and even sharing meals in the same kitchen, where so many arguments had erupted in the past. Through this process, I realized the true meaning of family. It's not about perfection or the absence of conflict, but about the willingness to face challenges together. The experience of reconciliation taught us resilience, empathy, and the value of love that endures hardship. Though the scars of our past remain, they serve as reminders of our growth and the strength we found in rediscovering each other.